My husband is giving me an ultimatum. Either we open up our marriage, or separate. My 33F, husband, 38M, and I have been together for 9 years and married for 6. We have 2 sons, 4 and 3. A little bit about our marriage. I stopped working when I became pregnant with our first son, and never went back to work because we haven't needed it. My husband makes a $400K working from home with a very flexible schedule. I tend to do more of the childcare since I don't work, but honestly not that much more. He loves spending time with our children, has a rather intense personality when it comes to organization, so he's very pro-cleaning, and one of his greatest passions, along with sex, is cooking, so he plans and cooks more than half of our meals. We still have our ups and downs of course, but overall we're both very patient and caring people and, up to this point, a very patient and caring relationship. Our views on child rearing align more or less entirely, and my entire family absolutely love him. His family is not in the picture. He grew up extremely poor in an unstable household. Before I got pregnant, we had sex 10 plus times a week as a baseline. Of course sometimes one of us was too busy, or stressed, or physically unwell, and that was never a problem. All things usual though, we had sex more than once a day for years. Then we decided to have children. We both love children, and knew that this would change almost every element of our lives and marriage. In conversations around this, we did discuss the likelihood of sex being less frequent for a while, and it didn't seem like a big deal. During the pregnancy, we continued to have pretty regular sex. That changed drastically once my son was born. I felt like I had zero libido, but my husband was extremely understanding at the time. He said that I just grew a human, so it makes sense for my body to be prioritizing different things. He was more or less happy with more sporadic sex for the next 2 years, and I thought everything was fine. Once our youngest was around 18 months, he started to instigate more mornings and nights again. I turned him down a decent amount because I just wasn't feeling any desire for sex. After a couple months of this, he asked me what he could do to help me get my drive back to what it used to be. He asked this gently, and I didn't respond as well as I could have. It was upsetting in the moment, and we ended up having really the first big fight of our marriage over it. We both ended up apologizing, but it was only a couple weeks later that he instigated another talk about it. Mind you, it's not like we never have sex. We're probably having sex 2 to 3 times a week. He suggested that we get couples therapy and that maybe I should see an endocrinologist. I responded better this time, and agreed. Hormone panels came back regular, so we tried a couple different therapists for a few sessions each. Both basically said his expectations were unrealistic and partnerships are about compromise. In those sessions my husband's response was that he isn't ready to compromise on something that's so important to him. He was asked if it's more important to him than having a healthy marriage, and while he said no, in hindsight there was some definite hesitancy. Over the following months I noticed a decrease in emotional affection on his end. It's hard to put a finger on, and for a while I told myself it was just in my head. He's still attentive, caring, and affectionate, but there is just a lack of depth in the intimacy compared to the past 7 to 8 years. He also stopped initiating sex as often, which I hope was just him becoming more comfortable with some level of compromise, but I approached the subject with him. He said that getting rejected multiple times a week wasn't healthy for his emotional disposition, so he's balancing how much he initiates with how much rejection he can handle. Obviously I wasn't happy to hear this, and I explained to him that I wasn't rejecting him out of any lack of love or desire for him. He said he knew that, but kind of brushed it off still. I've tried to get him to go to therapy by himself, but he insists that everyone has different method for processing things, and therapy isn't one of his. So things continued like this for the rest of the year, and to be honest I kind of thought this was it. Then comes last night. He walked into our room after putting the kids down, we take turns reading them books before bedtime, and said he needed to have a serious discussion. I immediately knew it was going to be about sex, because the only times in the 9 years I've known him that he says we need to talk with such somber dread, it's about our sex life. I was not at all prepared for what he said though. Through tears, this is the first time I've ever seen him cry from sadness. He said that he wasn't built to be in a relationship that didn't regularly express love through sex. He said that he would always love me, and that I'd always be the mother of his children, but he can't and won't go on like this. He told me that he believes there are only 2 options. Either we divorce and continue to co-parent, or we open up the marriage and he finds someone else to have sex with multiple times a week. Transparently, the first half of the ensuing conversation is a bit of blur because of how emotional it was. I went from being devastated bordering pathetic, to furious with more rage than I've ever felt in my life. I said some things I regret and didn't mean. He stayed relatively calm throughout it, but he did say that he wouldn't have a conversation with me if I kept yelling. Eventually I calmed down, and begged him to try and rekindle our sex life. I even tried to initiate right there, which is incredibly embarrassing now, which he rejected. He said he was open to working on getting our sex life back to a place that was happy for both of us, but that can't mean me having sex when I don't really want to, and that he has needs he has to go get elsewhere for now. I told him I didn't want to open up our marriage, and begged him more to work it out. He said he needed some space and he was going to go stay with a friend of his for the night. I texted him early that morning to let him know not to come, and that I was going to take the kids to visit my parents for a couple days. He was hesitant but agreed to let me take them for a while I process. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose this marriage, but the thought of him sleeping with other people hurts so fucking much. I don't know what I'm looking for, or if there's any advice to be had. I feel like my world is collapsing and it's my fault. My parents know something is wrong because of how distressed I am, and even worse, both of our sons can tell. I've tried to hide it, but I'm a mess. My husband says if we stayed together and he felt rejected regularly, he'll end up resenting me and that it's better for our children to have separate parents than resentful ones. Should I open up the marriage or move forward with divorce? Update. I don't have the time to respond to individual comments at the moment, but I will tomorrow. Thank you for all of your advice and support. I've spent most of the day talking with my mom while my dad took the kids on an adventure. I love my mom so much, she is such a rock. I do think we are heading for divorce, but I don't want it to be one of animosity. A lot of the comments are well-meaning but really assume the worst of my husband. His position on sex is extremely immature and selfish. I can see that now, and I don't have to forgive him for it. He is also an incredibly loving and kind person who has supported me through thick and thin. He holds himself to obsessively high standards, and while people will say I'm native, I know this man well and I can't imagine him bearing the guilt of adultery. He simply thinks too high of himself and is too sensitive. He is staying at his married friend from college. He is godfather to their 3 children. His wife has already reached out to offer support if I want to talk since she knows we are going through trouble. I don't think it's a stretch to say he will regret this, but to those that think he is going to have trouble finding people to sleep with and run back to me. Well, he was a regular in a sex and BDSM communities in his 20s before we met. I knew this from early on, and never stopped exercising 6 days a week. I would like to tell myself that he would come running back after realizing it's hard out there, but I just don't think that's the case. I think his view of the world is that if he does what is asked of him, he can ask the world to have his cake and eat it too. For people saying to take him for everything he has. I'm going to talk to a divorce lawyer this week. I will of course do my due diligence, but he has always been generous with his money, with charities, friends, etc., and loves his children as much as I do. I do not say that lightly. I'm not going to try and ruin him, as some have suggested. We are still going to be co-parents even if we separate, and I want to handle this with maturity. If we don't see eye to eye, then I won't shy away from court, but I honestly think he will sign whatever number I give if it's remotely fair. He is a bad partner for his decision, but you don't know him like I do and he isn't a bad man. I've watched him struggle to figure this out and he is too selfish to accept the obvious answer, but it isn't for lack of remorse. Just, I don't know, immense selfishness and a will that believes the world can be what he wants, while also wanting it to be one of love and compassion. If that makes sense. Thank you again, we'll respond to comments when I have time. Update, 2. There are so many more comments and DMs than I could have imagined. Many of you have offered great advice and support. Many of you are well-meaning, but have obviously been hurt and are projecting some of your anger onto a situation rather than providing advice for the context provided. To everyone with good intentions though, I thank you so much. To the misogynistic/incels/creeps that invariably come out of the woods, fuck you. My husband wants to meet and talk this evening. I'm going to meet him. I'll give one more update after we meet, if that's allowed. There are too many comments at this point to respond to them. To answer some questions that seem genuine. 1. Yes, he is obsessive, and yes, he has childhood trauma. These things don't excuse him from what I now realize was an entirely unacceptable decision to give me an ultimatum. 2. To say that the sex is good for me when WW do have it would be an understatement. I'm not going to get into the details, but his appetite for life and energy is one of the reasons I fell in love with him. He definitely has an atypical view of sex beyond his extreme high libido. He'd describe his view as not being orgasm-oriented, and he often doesn't orgasm. Strangely, that's not the important part for him. I used to joke that he has sex like he cooks. Most of the best meals, and all of the best sex, I've ever had have come from him. 3. The advice here has made me realize that we are probably going to get divorced, and no matter what he needs therapy. He's so high functioning that I never really thought he needed it, but some of you have made some excellent points and my mind has completely changed on that. No matter what, I love him and he will always be the father of our beautiful children, so I will try to convince him to go to therapy even with us divorced. 4. I'm not going to spend more time on the infidelity. I'm sure some people are sincerely trying to help, but there's obviously nothing I can say to convince many people that I'm not entirely native or wearing rose-colored glasses. That's fine. I'm sure denial is the first step is true for lots of adultery survivors. Internet Strangers Project. It's what we do. 5. Yes, my libido was matching his pace for years, but I think a key difference may be that I wasn't like that before I met him. When we started dating, his friends endearingly called him slut because he slept with a lot of women. I knew all this. I was his first serious relationship at 29 years old, and I liked that. I always felt like his friends treated me a little special because of it. In hindsight, we should have talked about the inevitable eventual decline in sex frequency. I remember looking across the table from him on one of our first dates when he said I eat a lot of great food and have a lot of great sex. At 24, it sounded like he had figured out what was important. Now at 33, I don't think he's matured appropriately to recognize there are so many more important things. I feel sorry for both of us that this is the case. 6. Reading divorce literally hundreds of times in the comments has helped, I think. It still doesn't feel real, but I don't feel uncontrollable devastation every time I think about it now. I'm trying to digest that is probably where my life is heading. I want the divorce to be one that is led with love. I don't care that internet strangers think that isn't possible. He may not be capable of living the life I want, but he's capable of that. Also, so many people are saying I should tell everyone why we are getting divorced. It's just another point that none of you know him. I promise he will tell them. He will say we were no longer sexually compatible. There will be shock, but probably not as much as I wish. He is an incredible friend and godfather to more than one set of friends' children. They will stick by him, just like he would stick by them. Final update. So many people have expressed interest in an update, and I do feel somewhat indebted to those of you who gave advice and perspectives that have actually helped me. I wasn't really expecting my post to end up influencing me in any way, but it did make a difference. R/relationship advice clearly stated in their rules that only one update is allowed, so I'm writing one here. I will pay it forward, and try to offer advice when I can to others from my main account. This will be my final update. Before I met my husband last night, I read every single comment and DM. Yes, every single one. With that in my head, I drove the hour to our home, leaving the kids at my parents'. I went in with multiple intentions, but overall I wanted to keep my composure. I was scared to be hopeful, but I knew that deep down I was yearning for this to be a conversation where we felt connected. When I walked in, he was already sitting at the table. Jesus Christ. He looked like shit. This is a man who is typically hyper-composed, so before words were even said I had already never seen him like this. He tried to ask me how I was doing and how the boys are. I was blunt that the boys are fine having a snow day, and that he was the one who asked me to come here, so tell me what you want to say. The way I said it didn't feel good as there was an air of coldness that is just so foreign to how either of us speak to each other, but it's how it came out. He started by apologizing and saying that he could have done better at organizing his feelings and presenting what he thought our only remaining options were. I didn't read too much into this because he almost always thinks he could have done better in every situation in hindsight and is rarely satisfied with how he performs. Then the surprise. He said that he thought about it, and that opening the marriage wouldn't fix anything, and that it was a desperate and frantic idea he had thought the night before. He said the only way forward is for us to separate. He said he had already gotten 3 months unpaid leave approved from work to handle things. He was breaking up a little bit already, and I was doing my best to not let that make me start breaking up because one of my goals was to try and stay calm. Part of me regrets my next move, and to be honest I know I did it because of some of the advice. I looked him in the eyes and asked him if he already found someone to sleep with. It felt cruel after I said it because I didn't believe he had and it obviously only hurt him further. Of course he said no, and asked me if I thought he was capable of that. I told him I didn't know what he was capable of anymore. More hurt. My emotional composure was also pretty much ruined when I said that because it made me start to cry, but at least not sobbing this time. He said the same things he said last time I saw him. That he would always love me, and that more important than anything is that I will always be our son's mother. We were both crying, but controllably, when the next thing came out of my mouth before I could even process it. I asked him if he's really ready to completely miss half of their lives. I knew obviously we were going to talk about our sons, but that question wasn't premeditated. It was a bomb. The last time I saw him was the first time I saw him cry from sadness, but it was controlled crying. The only words he managed to squeeze out were I don't know what to do, and then absolute breakdown. It isn't that I was any way surprised by his love for our boys. I've known that since day one. I just honestly have never thought he was capable of losing control to the degree that followed though. He was sobbing uncontrollably. Just as bad as I had the night he sprung the ultimatum. Probably worse. In that moment, I didn't know what to do. My heart was breaking for him and I wanted to hold and cradle him like he's always done for me in that state. I was also still very angry at him, fair or not. I don't know how long I sat there, but I couldn't watch it that long before I was also crying harder and then just saying that I was sorry. I told him I don't want to lose him. That he's the only person I want to wake up to every morning and share breakfast with our boys. He just said again and again that he didn't know what to do. I don't need to give further play-by-play, but it feels important, and pleasantly vulnerable, to share that. When the heavy crying passed, we kept talking and I eventually brought up that his friends, wife had reached out to me. He said that he had shared everything with both of them. This wasn't a surprise given he was best man at their wedding and godfather to their children, and to the comments suggesting my husband was sleeping with literally his 20-year best friend's wife. I'm sorry for the gross world you live in. I asked what their advice was. They both said they would love him no matter what happened, but he should really get a therapist. I asked if he was going to. His first response was that he didn't want to, but a couple moments after that he said that if both of them think he needs one, then he's sure they are right and he's going to find one that works for him. This felt like all the light I've been looking for in this dark chapter. In hindsight, I wish we would have involved any of his close friends earlier. They are his family. He respects my advice and seeks it out, but I was another party in the matter and from his mind my suggestions were just that. Now the people he loves and respects, and he believes they understand him, which is a list of like 5 people, have told him to go seek therapy for his relationship to sexual expression and validating love. As soon as he said he was going to try therapy, I grabbed his hands and swore I would work harder to give him what he needs. I told him that I can't view my life with anyone but him and I don't want either of us to miss a Christmas or birthday or any other important moment in our sons' lives. I told him let's go to Europe for a month. We've been once since the kids were born but we took both of them and it was kind of a visit our friends in Europe who want to meet our kids tour. Also, this was an idea I remember reading from a comment, so thank you. I promised many more things and meant them. We let my parents know I wouldn't be coming back for the boys tonight. I've overshared this experience in a way that is really weird and I won't ever do again, but it feels good. I'll leave the rest between my husband and I. I told my husband about the post and asked if it was okay with him if I wrote an update about what happened. He was concerned about anonymity, but I explained all the info I had given and decided he didn't care, which is his way of saying he does care but he chooses not to care because he controls his relationship to control, not the other way around. He warily, with a touch of self-aware humor that's so on brand for him, asked if he wanted to see the post and replies. I told him he doesn't, to which he laughed and said okay. He doesn't use Reddit, or any social media, since he knows how the sausage is made. Neither of us are fools. We have a long road ahead and there is no guarantee it will work. But I'm going to try harder. Reading the comments made me realize some of this was indeed my fault. Not necessarily for doing anything wrong, but for misjudging what was at stake. I knew my husband felt bad about himself when he laid next to me wanting physical intimacy and knowing I didn't. I truly didn't know, and maybe to a degree didn't listen, to how bad it hurt him. To say he overanalyzes things would be an insult to the franking incredible ability his mind has for assessing so many possibilities, seemingly at the same time. He's been laying in bed with that feeling just building and building and building. This isn't about physical sexual release. Masturbating, or even fucking someone else wasn't going to release this. My husband is a hypersexual being and that's okay. I love him entirely, including that part, and I need to do a lot more work to be better positioned to get into a mood of sexual desire more often. But he needs to not feel explosive rage at himself on the inside when he doesn't receive the sexual intimacy every night. If we didn't have kids, I would feel less optimistic. I told him this is not impossible though, and we can work on this together. We've always been a team at everything else. We have to be a team here. This is now kind of a meandering rant, so I'll close it up with a few random points I thought about because of this thread. So many people have asked, and he said I could share. My husband is a network engineer. He taught himself to code as a teenager, for less than savory reasons, but he lived in slums and ethics are complicated, and got a full ride to one of the top programs in the country. Financially speaking, he's had a cushy life ever since. His words. I know he is damn good at what he does, but he also benefits from always handling finances like an obsessive analyst with a huge ego. Also his words. The most common response by far was that I should divorce him, with about half of those saying I should do it happily and basically he sucks / is a poss with no respect for me or women. These made me reread my post more than anything. Maybe there was some unintentional villainizing of my husband in my post, but I tried my best to give the situation and describe his character. As a social experiment, I wonder if it would have been any different if I specially mentioned his second most contributed charity as a women's and children's shelter, entirely due to his childhood trauma, but still sweet. This is going to be the most controversial piece, but fuck it. Reddit loves spice. In total transparency, there is very much a sense of desire to control my body from my husband. The interest is purely based on the premise of enthusiastic consent. It's a part of him though, and I've known, and mostly admired, his relationship to that part of himself for most of my time knowing him. The same date when he told me that he has a lot of great sex and eats a lot of great food, he asked me what my relationship to control was. It's an interesting thing for everyone to think about. He told me then and there that his relationship with control was very intense. That he is very sensitive to not wanting to coerce anyone into be controlled because he furiously opposes anyone trying to do that to him. He knows it's in his personality, and he tries to be very self-aware of it, especially when interacting with friends and most importantly our sons. You cannot understand my husband without understanding this. He tracks everything about his life. He journals every night and keeps all entries for the past 20 plus years of his life in a private server that he runs in our basement. He runs data analytics on it, just as he does with our finances and practically any other information he can coalesce. People asked if he is neurodivergent. Well, he isn't socially challenged at all, but he certainly isn't a normal person if that's the question. He also has had a serious sleeping disorder since he was a young child and only sleeps like 4 hours a night. Yet still has way too much energy. He is beyond special, and I love him and I'm grateful to be with him. Many of you made sure to remind me of how special he is. Many of you hated him, but if you knew him I think very few of you would feel that way. Even if you did, he's my husband, and I deeply hope we can make it stay that way. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep it that way. As one person messaged me, fuck your husband. No. Seriously girl. Please do whatever work you need to do to help you fuck your husband. You both deserve it. Thank you everyone who helped and those who tried. Oh, and to the misogynists, eat shit.